Ethan Caldwell walked straight past the most beautiful woman in the room without blinking. Every candle in the Caldwell mansion trembled as he moved past the silk gowns, past the perfume, past Charlotte Beaumont standing in the center of it all like a painting commissioned for his approval. He stopped. In front of her sister, the one with rough hands, the one with calluses on her palms and dried mud still caught at the heel of her boot, the one nobody had thought to position anywhere near the front. "Clara," he said quietly, "will you marry me?" The room stopped breathing. If this story already has your heart subscribed to our channel, hit that notification bell and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The evening had been planned down to the last detail. The Caldwell Mansion's great hall had been lit with 100 candles. The dining table had been set with silverware imported from back east. The guest list had been trimmed, curated and approved by Harlan Caldwell himself, patriarch of the largest cattle empire in South Texas, a man who treated invitations the way he treated business contracts. Nothing got in the door without his signature. And the centerpiece of the entire evening was Charlotte Beaumont. She was 23 years old, flaxen-haired, raised in a house where young women were taught that grace was a form of currency. She knew how to enter a room, how to hold a wine glass, how to laugh just quietly enough to seem modest and just warmly enough to seem approachable. She had been prepared for this night the way a thoroughbred is prepared for the county fair, brushed, fed, and positioned in the best possible light. Her father, Gerald Beaumont, had told her 3 days prior, "This is the night that decides everything for this family, Charlotte. Do not embarrass me." She had not slept well since. Standing now at the edge of the great hall, Charlotte watched Ethan Caldwell descend the main staircase and felt her pulse settle into something almost like confidence. He was handsome, she'd grant him that. Broad-shouldered, dark-eyed, the kind of quiet that came not from timidity, but from a man who'd never once in his life needed to raise his voice to be heard. He wore a dark vest over a white shirt. No cravat, a small rebellion in a room full of men who'd knotted their neckwear like declarations of social rank. Charlotte smoothed the front of her gown and smiled. Ethan crossed the hall. He was supposed to stop in front of her. Gerald Beaumont had arranged it. Harlan Caldwell had agreed to it. 2 fathers, 2 empires, 1 handshake in a lawyer's office, 6 weeks prior. The match had been in every practical sense already decided. Ethan kept walking. Charlotte's smile didn't fall, not yet. She thought he was making conversation with someone behind her. She turned slightly, expecting to find him greeting a business acquaintance, some old ranching family from the valley, anyone. But he wasn't behind her. He had moved past her entirely. He was crossing the room toward the far wall where the hired helps area ended and the family's proper sitting space began, a strange invisible border in the Beaumont world, enforced not by any rope or fence, but by years of unspoken rule. Clara Beaumont stood there. She was 26, older than Charlotte, though most people who met the sisters for the first time guessed it the other way around. Clara didn't carry herself like a woman who'd been tended to. She stood the way a woman stands when she's spent the last decade learning that no one is coming to relieve her. Straight-backed, watchful, still. She was wearing a dress that had seen better years. Her hair was pinned up, but simply without artistry. There was no jewelry at her throat, no silk at her wrists. And yes, Gerald Beaumont would later spit the words like a condemnation. There was faint road dust still on the toe of her left boot, because she had ridden in from the eastern fence line less than 2 hours ago to make this supper at all. Nobody had been watching Clara. That was in every social sense the point. So when Ethan Caldwell stopped in front of her, when the heir to the largest cattle empire in South Texas stood 4 inches from the invisible woman at the edge of the room and looked at her with the full and deliberate weight of his attention, nobody in that hall knew what they were seeing. Not for 1 full second. Then Gerald Beaumont understood. Clara. Ethan's voice wasn't loud. He didn't perform it. He said her name the way a man says the name of something he's been thinking about for a long time. "Will you marry me?" Gerald Beaumont's wine glass hit the floor. The shattering of it was the only sound in the room for what felt like an entire minute. Then Charlotte made a small, strange noise. Not a cry, not a word. Something caught between the two, and Gerald Beaumont's face went from white to red so fast it looked like a fever coming on. "What in the—" He crossed the room in 4 strides, and his voice, when it came out, was not controlled. "What in the hell do you think you are doing?" Ethan turned to face him. He was unhurried. "I'm asking your daughter a question, Mr. Beaumont. You are insulting my family in front of every man of standing in this county." Gerald's voice cracked at the edges. "We had an arrangement, you and I, our families. You know perfectly well which daughter—" "I know which daughter you wanted," Ethan said. "I'm asking which one I want." The room was very still. "She belongs in the barn," Gerald said, and his voice had dropped now, which made it worse. Somehow the cold, practiced contempt of a man who'd said it so many times, it had become simple fact in his mind. "She's a working girl. She smells like horses. She's got no manners, no education worth speaking of." "Pa." Clara's voice was quiet, but it cut clean. Gerald looked at her. His jaw tightened. "Don't you paw me," he said. "Don't you dare stand there and act like you didn't engineer this somehow. You've always been jealous of your sister. Always scheming." "I didn't know he was going to do this," Clara said flatly. "I didn't ask for this." She looked at Ethan then, and there was nothing soft in her expression. Nothing grateful. She looked, if anything, the way a person looks when they've just been handed a problem they weren't expecting. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "I appreciate the sentiment, but I think there's been some kind of confusion." "There hasn't," Ethan said. "We've spoken twice," Clara said. "Once at the county assessor's office when you asked me about the Henderson water easement. Once at your south fence when your foreman was having a dispute with ours and somebody needed to read the original survey line." She held his gaze. "That's twice, sir. That's not a courtship." "No," Ethan agreed. "It isn't. I'm proposing to skip that part and go straight to the question." From across the room, Harlan Caldwell finally moved. He was a larger man than his son, broader through the chest, with the kind of face that had been handsome once and had since become impressive in the way that old mountains are impressive, mostly because of how much weather they'd survived. He walked slowly because men like Harlan Caldwell had never in their lives had reason to hurry. "Ethan?" His voice was flat. "A word." "In a minute, Father." "Now." "In a minute." Harlan stopped walking. He looked at his son the way generals look at soldiers who've just broken formation with a fury that is cold and perfectly controlled, and will absolutely be addressed in full later. But Ethan had turned back to Clara. "I know what I'm doing," he said low enough that it was mostly for her. "And I know it's not what you expected tonight. But I'm asking you serious, and I'm asking you clean. Will you consider it?" Clara looked at him for a long moment. "Let me talk to my sister first," she said. "Clara," Gerald started. "Pa, stop." The sharpness in her voice surprised the room. Not because it was loud, it wasn't, but because it landed with the authority of someone who knew exactly what she was saying and had stopped apologizing for it. "You don't get to talk for me tonight. You've done enough of that." Gerald Beaumont's face worked through several expressions in quick succession. None of them were good. Clara crossed the room to where Charlotte still stood. Charlotte had not moved. Her color was bad, and her hands, Clara noticed, were clasped so tightly together that the knuckles had gone white. "Charlie," Clara said. "Don't," Charlotte whispered. "I didn't ask for this." "I know you didn't." Charlotte's voice was very tight. "That makes it worse somehow. That he walked past me like I wasn't—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "Like I was furniture." "I'm sorry," Clara said, and she meant it. "Don't be sorry." Charlotte looked up, and there was something in her eyes that Clara couldn't quite read. Anger, yes, but something beneath the anger that looked almost like relief, and that confused Clara more than anything else. "Just tell him no. Tell him you're not interested. Fix it, Clara, the way you fix everything." Clara looked back across the room. Ethan Caldwell was standing very still, talking in low tones with his father. Harlan's face had not improved. The two men looked from this distance like a painting of every argument that had ever been fought between a man who had built something and a son who'd inherited it, the fundamental disagreement about what it was all worth and who got to decide. Ethan caught her looking. He didn't smile. He just held her gaze. Patient. Sure. "I'll fix it," Clara said. She found him on the back porch 20 minutes later. She had excused herself from the room which had erupted quietly and viciously in the manner of people trained to be vicious without raising their voices, the moment it became clear the evening wasn't going the way anyone had planned. Ethan was leaning against the porch rail, looking out at the dark flat of the Texas night. He had a cup of coffee in his hand and didn't appear particularly troubled. "You should go back inside," Clara said. "Your father is going to say something to my father, and then the lawyers are going to have a very expensive spring." "Let them," Ethan said. He glanced at her. "You want some coffee?" "I want you to explain yourself." He considered this for a moment. Then he set the cup on the rail and turned to face her properly. "2 months ago," he said, "I rode out to your east pasture to settle the Henderson easement business. You remember that?" "I remember. Your foreman, Delacroix, that big quiet fella he told me you were the one who'd been managing the water rights, said you'd been doing it for 3 years. I figured that meant you had the paperwork. I didn't figure it meant you'd spent 3 years reading every water law on the books and filing 4 separate easement protests without a lawyer." Clara said nothing. "Then 2 weeks ago at your south fence," Ethan continued, "when our foreman and yours couldn't agree on the original survey line, you had the original survey. Not a copy. The original. From 1871. You'd tracked it down from the state land office yourself because you didn't trust anybody else to get it right." "The point being," Clara said, "the point being that your father's ranch should have failed 3 years ago. The finances were bad, the water situation was worse, and your family had exactly one person who understood any of it." He paused. "It wasn't your father, and it wasn't Charlotte." Clara's jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about my family," she said. "I know what I've seen," he said. "I know what those ranch hands told me not because I asked them, but because men who respect the person running things have a way of making sure that gets known." He looked at her steadily. "You've been carrying that ranch on your back while your father took the credit and your sister got the education. You've been doing it for years, and you've never once asked to be seen for it." "I didn't do it to be seen." "I know," he said. "That's exactly why I'm standing here." Clara looked at him. There was a part of her, a part she'd buried so long she barely recognized its voice anymore, that wanted to sit down right then. Not from exhaustion. From something more complicated than that. From the strange, almost painful feeling of being looked at directly by someone who wasn't asking her to be smaller. But she was 30 seconds past, letting that part of her make decisions. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "I appreciate what you think you saw. I do. But I have a sister inside who was publicly humiliated tonight. I have a father who is going to make my life very difficult regardless of what I say to you. And I have a ranch that needs me back before sunrise because we've got a fence line that isn't going to repair itself." She straightened. "With respect, this isn't a fairy story. And I'm not a woman who needs rescuing." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I know that," he said. "I'm not offering to rescue you. I'm asking if you'd be willing to run something together instead of alone." That stopped her. "You barely know me," she said. "I know enough," he said. "And I'd like to know more. But I meant what I said in there in front of your father and mine and every person in that room." His voice was even. "I wasn't performing. I don't perform." Clara studied him. She had spent her adult life reading people the way she read contracts, looking for the fine print, the buried clause, the promise that would collapse under the weight of reality. She had learned to distrust charm because charm was cheap, and it had been used on her family to devastating effect more than once. But there was something in Ethan Caldwell's face that didn't have the quality of performance about it. He wasn't working to convince her. He was simply telling her the truth and letting it stand there without decoration. That was in its own way more unsettling than anything else he could have done. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "That's all I asked." She turned to go back inside. "Clara," she stopped. "For what it's worth," he said quietly. "What your father said in there that you belong in the barn." A pause. "He's wrong. He's been wrong about you for a long time." She didn't turn around. "Yes," she said. "He has." And she walked back through the door, back into the noise and the ruin of a night that had started as someone else's story entirely. Inside, the damage was ongoing. Gerald Beaumont had corralled Harlan Caldwell near the fireplace and was speaking to him in the rapid, pressurized way of a man trying to reframe a disaster as a misunderstanding. Harlan was listening with the patient disdain of a man who had no need to reframe anything and knew it. Charlotte was seated on the far settee, a glass of water in her hand, speaking in low tones with Mrs. Aldridge, the wife of the county judge, a woman who had the particular social gift of appearing sympathetic while extracting maximum information. Charlotte was doing her best, but Charlotte, for all her training, had not been prepared for this. Clara moved through the room without stopping. She found Delacroix, her foreman, waiting by the front entrance, where she'd asked him to stand when they arrived, old habit having an exit, and someone she trusted near it. "I need to go back to the ranch tonight," she said. Delacroix looked at her for a moment. He was a quiet man, built wide with 20 years of Texas wind in his face. He didn't ask what happened. He'd been standing close enough to the doorway. "Wagons out front," he said. "Thank you, Miss Clara," he said it low. "For what it's worth. Nobody in that room who works the land on us thinks any less of you." Clara looked at him. "I know," she said. "Go bring the wagon round." She was crossing the front entrance hall when her father found her. "Don't you walk out of this house," Gerald said. His voice had dropped to its most dangerous register, the flat, quiet one that had preceded every significant punishment of her childhood. "Don't you dare walk out." "Pa," she said without stopping, "you think this is over?" He stepped in front of her. His face up close was a complicated map of fury, and something she might have called fear if she'd thought him capable of it. "You've destroyed this family tonight. Charlotte had one chance won, and you stood there and let that man make a mockery of everything we've worked for." "Everything you've worked for," Clara said. Gerald's eyes narrowed. "Everything I've worked for," she said again, and her voice was controlled, but it wasn't cold. It had heat in it, the specific heat of something that had been compressed for too long. "The east pasture fence I rebuilt with 4 hands and no foreman help in January of last year. The water easement I filed 4 times because the county kept losing the paperwork. The Henderson contract I negotiated in your name because you didn't understand what a lien actually was." She held his gaze. "All of it, Pa. Every piece of it. That's what I've worked for. You signed your name to what I built." Gerald's face was doing something complicated. "You ungrateful—" "I love this family," Clara said. "I love Charlotte. I love this land, and I have given the last 10 years of my life to keeping all 3 of them alive." She took 1 step forward. "But I am done being invisible while I do it. You understand me." Gerald said nothing. "I'm going home," she said. "I'll be in the east pasture before the sun comes up, same as every other morning. And when you're ready to have a conversation that isn't built on shame, I'll be there." She walked out the front door. The night air hit her face, and she breathed it in dry and dark, and smelling of cattle grass and dust, the smell of the only life she'd ever known. She heard Charlotte call her name from somewhere behind her, but the wagon was already there, and Delacroix was already holding the reins, and Clara Beaumont climbed up and kept her face forward and did not look back. She did not cry. She had not cried in a very long time. She wasn't entirely sure, sitting there in the wagon, as the Caldwell mansion's lights shrank behind her, whether what she felt was rage or grief or something she didn't have a name for. The particular weight of a woman who has spent so long being treated like nothing, that the first moment someone tells her she's worth something feels less like relief and more like a threat. Because she knew how this world worked. She had read enough contracts to know that the fine print was always where the danger lived. And Ethan Caldwell, for all his steady eyes and unhurried voice, was still his father's son. She'd learned young the kindness of powerful men always came attached to something else. Always. The wagon rolled on through the dark Texas night, and Clara Beaumont held the rail and stared straight ahead, and told herself firmly, deliberately, the way she told herself everything she needed to believe that she had made the right choice, that she had been smart, that she had walked away. She almost believed it. She was back at the east fence before the sky had fully decided what color it wanted to be. Delacroix rode beside her without speaking, which was one of the reasons she trusted him above most living people. He understood that some mornings weren't for talking. Some mornings were just for getting back to work and pretending the night before had been a dream. The fence post hadn't repaired itself as expected. Clara pulled on her gloves and got to it. She was halfway through the third post when she heard a horse coming up the east road. Not Delacroix's bay. Different gait, longer stride, unhurried the same way its rider was unhurried at everything. She didn't turn around. "You're going to tell me you've had second thoughts," she said. "No," Ethan Caldwell said. "I brought you coffee." She turned around then, because that was not what she'd expected him to say. He was on horseback holding 2 tin cups, like a man who had planned this specific moment and wasn't embarrassed about it. He looked like he'd ridden since before dawn. He probably had. "You came to my fence line," Clara said. "Before sunrise." "I came to your fence line," he confirmed. "Before sunrise." "Mr. Caldwell." "Ethan." "Mr. Caldwell." She held his gaze. "If you think riding out here at first light with coffee is going to soften me, I want you to know I have been negotiating with cattle suppliers for 8 years, and not one of them has ever won an argument by being charming." "I'm not trying to win an argument," he said. He held out the cup. "I'm just drinking coffee." She looked at the cup. She looked at him. She took the coffee. Delacroix, from somewhere down the fence line, made absolutely no sound whatsoever, which Clara recognized as the sound of a man being very deliberately diplomatic. "Your father came to see mine last night," Ethan said after a moment. "About an hour after you left. I figured he would. He wants the arrangement honored. Says Charlotte is still available. Says last night was a misunderstanding." He paused. "My father told him he'd think on it." Clara felt something cold move through her chest. She took a sip of coffee and kept her face still. "And what did you tell your father?" she asked. "The same thing I told him in that room," Ethan said. "That I wasn't confused about what I wanted." He must have loved that. He threw a ledger at the wall. Ethan said it calmly. "He's done it before. The wall survives." Clara almost smiled. She caught it before it arrived. "Mr. Caldwell, I have a question, and I want an honest answer." "All right. Why me?" She looked up at him directly. "And don't give me the speech about the water easements. Don't tell me it's because you saw me work. Men see women work every day on every ranch in this county, and they don't propose to them at dinner parties." She waited. "So why me? Honest." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "Because the first time I spoke to you," he said finally, "you were the only person in the room who wasn't trying to manage me. Your foreman introduced us, and you shook my hand the same way you'd shake the hand of the county surveyor and went straight into the easement numbers without preamble. You didn't smile extra. You didn't adjust anything about yourself." He looked at her steadily. "You were just real. And I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since, because I can count on one hand the number of people in my life who are real." Clara said nothing. The sun was just fully clearing the horizon now, and the light was coming across the flat land in long gold lines, and for 1 second, just one, she let herself feel the full weight of what he'd said. Then she put it away. Carefully. In the same place she put everything she couldn't afford. "You should go," she said. "If your father sees you here, it'll make things worse." "My father already knows I'm here," Ethan said. "I told him." "You told him." "I told him I was coming to speak to you. He told me if I did, he'd start reconsidering my place in the succession." Ethan finished his coffee. "I came anyway." Clara stared at him. "You risked your inheritance," she said slowly, "to bring me coffee at a fence line." "The coffee was an afterthought," he said. "The riding out here was the point." She handed him back the cup. "Come back tomorrow," she said. "Same time." And she turned back to the fence post. He came back the next morning, and the morning after that. By the fifth morning, Delacroix had stopped pretending not to notice and had started having a second cup ready. They didn't talk about marriage. They talked about water tables and cattle prices and the Henderson family's failed appeal, and whether the drought pattern was shifting north or staying put. They talked the way two people talk when they are both more comfortable with problems than with feelings, circling the real thing by discussing everything adjacent to it. On the sixth morning, Charlotte showed up instead. Clara heard the horse and assumed it was Ethan, and felt something in her chest do a thing she'd told it not to do, and then turned and saw her sister, and the feeling rearranged itself quickly into something more complicated. Charlotte looked like she hadn't slept well in 6 days, which was probably accurate. She dismounted without being helped, walked to where Clara was standing and said, "I'm not here to fight." "All right," Clara said. "Pa's been difficult." "I expect so." "He told the Aldridges that you manipulated the situation, that you'd set your sights on Ethan Caldwell for months and arranged the whole thing." Charlotte's voice was careful. "It's going around town, Clara. What he's saying." Clara felt the cold thing move through her chest again. Slower this time, more deliberate. "Of course it is," she said. "I didn't tell him to do that," Charlotte said. "I want you to know that." "I know Charlie. But I didn't stop him." Charlotte's voice dropped. "And I should have. I know I should have." A pause. "He said you belong in the barn, in front of half the county, and I didn't say anything." Clara looked at her sister. There were about 14 years of history living in the space between them. 14 years of a father who had chosen clearly and constantly which daughter mattered. 14 years of a younger sister who had accepted that choosing without ever quite looking directly at what it cost the other one. 14 years of Clara deciding over and over that she would not make her sister feel guilty for something their father had done. She was tired of that decision, but she made it one more time. "You were raised to survive him," Clara said. "The same as I was. We just used different methods." Charlotte looked at her for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "He's going to try to stop it, Clara. Whatever is happening between you and Ethan Caldwell. Pa called in a favor with Judge Aldridge, and he's going to start making noise about the Beaumont ranch debts. He's going to use the accounts to pressure you, to make it look like you managed the finances poorly." Clara went very still. "The Beaumont accounts," she said. "He said if you don't end things with Caldwell, he'll let it be known that the ranch is failing and that you're the one responsible, that you mismanaged everything." Charlotte looked miserable. "He's going to make you the villain, Clara, in front of everyone." For one full moment, Clara didn't say anything. Then she said, "Let him try." Charlotte blinked. "Clara, I have every ledger for the past 8 years," Clara said. "Every contract, every filing, every correspondence. I have copies at the land office. I have copies in a box in the barn that Pa doesn't know exists." Her voice was steady, completely steady. "If he wants to have a conversation about who managed what, I am very ready to have that conversation." Charlotte looked at her like she was seeing her for the first time. "When did you become like this?" she said. Not unkindly, with something that sounded almost like awe. "I've always been like this," Clara said. Nobody was paying attention. The town moved fast. By midweek, the story Gerald Beaumont had seeded through the Aldridge household had taken root and grown in the particular way that small-town stories grow, fed by implication, watered by assumption, blooming into something much uglier than the original seed. The version going around the dry goods store, Clara Beaumont, had always been jealous of her sister's prospects and had finally found a way to sabotage them. The version at the church social, Clara Beaumont had been meeting with Ethan Caldwell in secret for months, which was why she'd so easily stolen his attention at the party. The version at the lawyer's office, which was the version that traveled farthest and fastest. Clara Beaumont had run the Beaumont Ranch into the ground and was now looking for a wealthy husband to cover her failures. Clara heard all three versions within 4 days. She heard the first from Delacroix, who heard it at the feed store. She heard the second from the minister's wife, who delivered it with the practiced sympathy of a woman who genuinely believed she was being kind. She heard the third from a young ranch hand named Tobias, who was 19 years old, and had the decency to look ashamed when he repeated it. "Where'd you hear that one?" she asked him. "Judge Aldridge's clerk," Tobias said. "At the saloon. He said Mr. Beaumont told the judge direct." Clara thanked him and went back to the ledger she was working on. That evening, Ethan rode up, and she didn't wait for him to dismount. "Your father needs to hear something," she said, "and so do you." Ethan looked at her. "All right. My father is telling people I ruined the Beaumont Ranch. He's using the debts that exist because of decisions he made, not me to paint me as incompetent. And he's doing it because he thinks it'll push me into ending whatever this is between us." She held his gaze. "I need you to know that I have documentation for all of it. Every decision I made, every filing, every contract. I can prove every number." "I never doubted that," Ethan said. "I need you to understand what coming after me is going to cost your family," she said. "If your father decides to back Gerald Beaumont's version of events, if the Caldwell name gets attached to those rumors, the only way I can defend myself is by making the real accounts public. All of them." She paused. "That means the Beaumont family's reputation takes damage. That means your engagement negotiation becomes a public record. That means a lot of things get aired that both our fathers would prefer kept quiet." Ethan was listening. Really listening, the full, unhurried attention of a man who wasn't performing listening but actually doing it. "I'm not asking you to protect me," Clara said. "I'm not asking you to fight my father. I'm telling you what I'm prepared to do, and I'm asking if you're prepared for the same." "Yes," Ethan said. "Just that. No qualification. No hedge." "Ethan." She said his name for the first time and felt him notice it. "This is going to get worse before it gets better." "I know," he said. "Your father is going to make your life very difficult." "He already has," Ethan said. 2 days ago, he told me he's reconsidering the succession terms. He's talking about bringing in my cousin Marcus from Galveston to review the accounts, which is his way of reminding me that the empire isn't mine yet." He paused. "I told him the empire wasn't the point." Clara looked at him. "You keep saying things like that," she said. "Like the money doesn't matter." "The work matters," he said. "The land matters. The people on it matter. The money is just—" He stopped, started again. "My father built what he built by making money the point, by making everything else secondary to it." He looked at her steadily. "I've watched what that costs for 30 years. I'm not interested in inheriting the same bill." Something shifted in Clara's chest. She didn't have a name for it exactly. It was the feeling of a door she'd thought was sealed, moving just slightly on its hinge. "Come to the house tomorrow," she said. "Bring whoever you trust. I want to show you the real Beaumont accounts." "Why?" "Because I want you to understand exactly what you're walking into," she said. "And because if we're going to do this, whatever this is, I won't have it built on anything hidden. Not one thing." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "All right," he said. He rode out as the light faded. Clara watched him go, then turned toward the barn, then stopped. Because something had just occurred to her. Something small. A thread. The kind of thing you don't notice until you've been staring at columns of numbers long enough that the ones that don't fit start to glow. 3 years ago, the Henderson family had lost their ranch. Water rights dispute, everyone said. But the Hendersons had been on that land for 22 years. They had the same kind of original surveys Clara had been collecting for the Beaumont Ranch. They were not careless people. They were not people who lost water rights by accident. and the family that had absorbed the Henderson water allocation, the Caldwells. Clara stood very still. She went to the barn. She found the box under the third beam, the box Pa didn't know about. She opened it and started reading by lamplight. She read for 3 hours. By the time she was done, her hands were not entirely steady, because she had found something, and it was not small, and it was not going to stay hidden much longer. She didn't sleep. By the time the lamp burned low, Clara had read every document in that box twice. She had cross-referenced dates. She had laid contracts side by side on the barn floor and traced the signatures with her finger the way a person traces a scar slowly, carefully, already knowing it's going to hurt. The Henderson water rights hadn't been lost in a legal dispute. They had been taken. The filing that transferred the Henderson family's primary water allocation to Caldwell Cattle Holdings was dated March 14, 1895. It bore the signatures of 2 county water commissioners and 1 surveyor. It referenced an original survey from 1871 that placed the Henderson property boundary 40 yards west of where every other document Clara had ever seen placed it. 40 yards. That was all it took to make 22 years of Henderson ownership legally invisible. Clara knew that 1871 survey. She had a copy of it in her own files, the one she'd pulled from the state land office herself, the one she'd used to settle the Beaumont South Fence dispute. She had held that document in her hands. She knew what it said. And it did not say what the Caldwell filing claimed it said. Somebody had changed it. Or somebody had produced a version that had never existed and filed it as original. And 3 commissioners had signed off on it, one of whom was now a county judge. Judge Aldridge. The same Judge Aldridge her father had called in a favor with last week. Clara sat back on her heels in the barn and pressed her hands flat on the floor and breathed. The thread she'd pulled had not come loose. It had come with the entire garment attached. Ethan arrived the next morning with a man named Reeves, his father's head accountant. 30 years with the Caldwell operation, a small, precise man who wore his suits like armor. Clara did not miss the significance of Ethan bringing the accountant rather than a lawyer. Lawyers managed liability. Accountants chased truth. She had the documents laid out on the kitchen table when they walked in. Ethan looked at her face first, then at the table. "What is that?" he said. "Sit down," she said. He sat. Reeves sat beside him. Clara stood. "I'm going to show you something," she said. "And I need you to tell me honest if you've seen it before." She put the Henderson transfer filing in front of him. Then she put her copy of the 1871 survey beside it. Ethan read. Reeves read faster, his eyes moving in the quick, practiced way of a man who has spent decades reading numbers and knowing when they lie. The silence lasted about 90 seconds. Then Reeves said very quietly, "Where did you get this?" "I've been collecting land records for 3 years, Clara said. "For the Beaumont Ranch. Boundary protection." She kept her eyes on Ethan. "I pulled the original 1871 survey from the state land office 14 months ago. I have the request form. I have the date stamp. That is the original." Ethan's jaw was tight. "The filing says the boundary runs 40 yards west," he said. "Yes." "Our water allocation is based on that boundary." "Yes." "If the original survey places the line where you say—" "Then the Henderson family never legally lost their water rights," Clara said. "And your father's empire has been drawing from water it doesn't own for 11 years. Nobody said anything. Reeves reached out and picked up the transfer filing. He turned it over. He looked at the commissioner's signatures. Then he put it down and looked at Ethan and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the documents hadn't already said more clearly. "Ethan," Clara's voice was careful. "Tell me true. Did you know?" He looked at her. "No," he said. She believed him. Not because she wanted to, though she did, and she was honest enough with herself to admit it, but because she had spent enough years reading men across negotiating tables to know the difference between a man performing surprise and a man actually in it. His face had gone the particular color of someone watching something they'd believed in their whole life quietly collapse. "My father," he said. "It wasn't a question. I don't know how far it goes," Clara said. "I know the Henderson transfer. I have 3 other filings that use the same altered boundary reference. All of them benefit Caldwell Holdings. All of them were processed through commissioners whose names appear together in that specific combination nowhere else in the county records." Reeves made a sound, not a word, just a sound. "Mr. Reeves," Clara said, "how long have you been managing Caldwell accounts?" 31 years, he said. "Did you ever handle the Henderson transaction directly?" He was quiet for a long moment. Too long. "The water allocation accounts came through a separate filing," he said carefully. "I managed the operational ledgers. Mr. Caldwell Sr. handled the land acquisition filings personally." "Personally?" Clara repeated. "He said it was a complex legal matter. He had his own counsel." Clara looked at Reeves steadily. "And you didn't ask questions." Reeves looked at the table. "I did not ask questions." Ethan stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to the room, and Clara could see the tension across his shoulders. The specific tension of a man holding himself very still, because if he stops holding still, he doesn't know what he'll do. "Ethan," she said. "Give me a minute," he said. She gave him a minute. When he turned around, his face had settled into something harder and quieter than grief. It was the face of a decision being made. "What do you want to do with this?" he said. "I want to know what's right," she said. "What happens to the Henderson family if this stays buried?" "They stay landless," Ethan said. "They've been in Abilene for 11 years. 2 of the sons went to work on other ranches. Old man Henderson died 3 years ago." He paused. "His widow is still alive. His daughters. And what happens to the Caldwell operation if this comes out?" "We lose the water allocation," he said, "which means we lose the East Range, which means we lose about 30% of the herd capacity." He said it plainly without dressing it. "Father will fight it. He'll say the filing was done in good faith. He'll hire lawyers. He might survive it legally." He looked at her. "But it won't stay quiet. If it goes to the Land Commission, it becomes a public record." "It should become a public record," Clara said. "I know," he said. That stopped her. "You know," she said. "It's wrong, Clara." He said her name again, and it still registered somewhere she didn't entirely have control over. "Whatever my father built and however he built it, it's wrong. And I'm not—" He stopped, started again. "I am not going to look you in the eye and tell you to keep it buried so my inheritance stays clean." Reeves made another sound. This one might have been respect. "There's something else," Clara said. She reached back into the box. She pulled out the last document, the one she'd found at the bottom under everything else. The one that had made her hands unsteady. It was a letter. Handwritten. Dated November 1894, 4 months before the Henderson transfer filing. She put it on the table. Ethan picked it up. He read 3 lines and stopped. He read them again. "This is my mother's handwriting," he said. His voice had changed. Something in it had gone very quiet, the quiet of a man suddenly standing in a room he hadn't known existed. "I believe so," Clara said. "Where—" He looked up at her. "Where did you find this?" "It was in my father's files," Clara said. "In the box he gave me when I took over the ranch accounts. I think he kept it because he thought it might be useful to him someday. I think he didn't understand what it actually said." The letter was addressed to Gerald Beaumont. It was from Catherine Caldwell. It said in the measured, careful language of a woman who was choosing her words, knowing they might outlive her, she had found documents in her husband's study. She had read them. She believed a serious wrong had been done to the Henderson family, and she did not know how to make it right without destroying her own. She was asking Gerald Beaumont, who had been the letter implied a decent man once, for advice. Gerald Beaumont, as far as Clara could tell, had never responded. Catherine Caldwell had died 8 months later. Heart failure, the official account said. She was 44 years old. Ethan was holding the letter with both hands now, and he was not entirely steady. "She knew," he said. "She knew," Clara said. "And she tried to do something about it. She died trying to live with it." His voice was barely above flat. "Or trying not to." The room was very quiet. "Ethan!" Clara moved to the table. She didn't touch him, not yet, not quite, but she put herself close enough that he'd feel it. "I'm sorry. I know this isn't just about land records." "No," he said. He set the letter down. He pressed his hand flat on top of it. "It isn't." A long breath. "What do you need from me?" "I need to go to your father," she said. He looked up. "I need to show him what I found," she said. "And I need you beside me when I do, not to protect me, not to speak for me, just beside me." "He'll try to destroy you," Ethan said. "If he thinks you're a threat to the Empire, he will come at you with everything he has, the lawyers, the commissioners, your father's debts. He'll bury you if he can." "He can try," Clara said. "But I have copies of everything in 3 separate locations. I've already sent one set to a land lawyer in San Antonio. If anything happens to me or to these originals, that lawyer has instructions." She met his eyes. "Your father is a powerful man, but I've been outmaneuvering powerful men my entire life on a fraction of their resources. I'm not afraid of him." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I know." And something in the way he said it, simple, certain, completely without drama, landed in Clara's chest in a way she wasn't prepared for. "All right," he said. "When?" "Today," she said. "Before he hears it from someone else. Before he has time to build walls." Harlan Caldwell was at his desk when they walked in. He looked at his son first, then at Clara, then at the documents she was carrying. And something moved behind his eyes, quick controlled the flicker of a man who has survived 60 years by reading rooms faster than anyone else in them. "Miss Beaumont," he said. His voice was pleasant, professionally pleasant. "This is unexpected." "Mr. Caldwell," Clara said, "I need to show you something. I'm in the middle of—" "It won't take long." She put the Henderson transfer filing on his desk, then the original survey. Then the commissioner's signatures. "I found these in my family's land records. I've had them verified against the State Land Office originals." She kept her voice even, completely even. "I think you know what they say." Harlan looked at the documents. He didn't pick them up. He looked at them the way a man looks at something he's been expecting for a very long time, from very far away, and has finally, after all these years, watched arrive. "Where did you get these?" he said. Not a question. "My father's files," Clara said. "He kept them. I don't think he understood what they were." "And you do?" "I do," she said. "I've been reading land records for 8 years. I know exactly what these say." Harlan leaned back. He looked at his son. "You brought her here," he said. "She brought herself," Ethan said. "I came with her." "Son, don't." Ethan's voice was quiet, but it had iron in it. "Don't talk to me right now like I'm a problem to be managed. Look at what's on that desk." Harlan's jaw moved. "The Henderson situation was complicated," he said. "There were boundary disputes going back decades. The county commissioners reviewed the filings and found in our favor." "The commissioners found in your favor because 2 of them were on your payroll," Clara said. "And one of them is now a judge who is currently doing favors for my father on your behalf." She let that sit. "Sir, I am not here to threaten you. I am not here to negotiate. I am here because what was done to the Henderson family was wrong, and the only people who can make it right are in this room." Harlan's face was very controlled. "And if I decline to agree with your assessment, then I file what I have with the State Land Commission," Clara said. "I've already retained a lawyer in San Antonio. The filing is prepared. I've been waiting to speak to you first because I hoped you might be a man who, when faced with the truth directly, would choose to do what's right." She paused. "I may have been wrong about that, but I wanted to find out." The silence was absolute. Then Clara reached into the stack of documents and put the last one on the desk. Catherine Caldwell's letter. Harlan looked at it. He did not move for a full 10 seconds. Then something happened to his face that Clara had not seen coming and would not forget for the rest of her life. The control cracked not all at once, not dramatically, but at the edges, the way old timber cracks in a long freeze, and what came through was not anger. It was shame. Raw old, the kind that has been living in a person for so long it has become part of the structure. She wrote that, he said, barely audible. She actually wrote that down. She tried to find a way to make it right, Clara said. Her voice had shifted, not softer exactly, but more honest, less adversarial. She came to my father. He didn't help her, but she tried. Harlan's hand moved across the desk. It stopped just short of the letter. She was ashamed of me, he said. Yes, Clara said. I believe she was. It was the most brutal thing she could have said. She said it anyway because it was true, and she had promised herself she would not build anything on anything hidden. Ethan beside her was very still. Harlan sat with it. The silence was not comfortable. It was not meant to be. Then slowly, Harlan Caldwell reached out, and he picked up the letter. And he read it for the first time. And for the first time in longer than anyone in that room could calculate, the old man looked not like a patriarch, not like an empire builder, not like the most powerful man in South Texas. He looked like someone who had made a choice a long time ago that he couldn't unmake, and had been living inside that choice ever since. "What do you need from me?" he said. His voice had changed, just slightly, just enough. Clara took a breath. "The truth," she said. "All of it. And then we figure out what comes next." Harlan Caldwell talked for 2 hours. He didn't stop once. He didn't ask for water. He didn't ask for his lawyer. He sat behind his desk with Catherine's letter in his hands, and he talked the way a man talks when he has been carrying something alone for so long that the weight of it has become the only thing holding him upright, and someone has finally, without asking permission, taken hold of the other end. The Henderson transfer was not the beginning. It was not even the worst of it. There had been 3 families before the Hendersons. Small operations, all of them. A Mexican family named Vega, who had farmed the Southern Creek land since before Texas was a state. 2 brothers named Pryor who'd run sheep on land their father had homesteaded in 1859. A widow named Sadie Marsh, who had 160 acres of the best grazing land in the county, and no surviving male relatives to fight for it when the boundary dispute arrived at her door. All of them had lost land the same way. Altered surveys, compliant commissioners, a county system that had been quietly and systematically tilted in the direction of Caldwell money for nearly 20 years. Harlan had not started out planning it that way. That was what he said, and Clara believed him, which made it worse rather than better. He had started with one favor, one commissioner who owed him a debt, one boundary that needed to move 40 yards west to make a water deal work. And then the next one was easier because the first one hadn't cost him anything visible. And then the one after that. Until the mechanism was built and running, and he no longer thought of it as corruption, just as how things worked, just as business. "Catherine figured it out," he said. His voice had the flatness of a man who has run out of places to hide. "She found the original Henderson survey in my desk. She wasn't looking for it. She was looking for a deed copy for a charitable land gift she wanted to make." He stopped. "She came to me first, before she wrote that letter. She came to me, and she asked me to fix it." "What did you tell her?" Ethan said. Harlan was quiet for a moment. "I told her she didn't understand how land law worked," he said. "I told her to leave the business matters to me." Ethan said nothing. The silence had a specific quality, the quality of a son understanding fully, and finally the shape of the thing he'd grown up inside. "She never spoke to me about it again," Harlan said. "But she was different after that. She was distant. She was always kind. She was always decent. But there was something gone." He looked down at the letter. "I told myself she'd made peace with it. I think I knew she hadn't." Clara had been listening without moving. Now she said, "Mr. Caldwell, I need to know about Judge Aldridge." Harlan's jaw tightened. "He was one of the commissioners," he said, "on the Henderson filing. I supported his appointment to the bench 4 years later, financially and politically." "And now he's doing favors for my father," Clara said, "to pressure me." "I know," Harlan said. "Gerald Beaumont called me before he called Aldridge. He wanted my backing." A pause. "I didn't give it." Clara looked at him sharply. "You didn't back my father's play against me," she said. "No," Harlan said. He looked at her directly for what felt like the first time since they'd walked in. "I told Gerald that if he came after you, he was on his own. I told him you weren't a woman he could manage that way." Something moved in his face that wasn't quite respect, but was in the same neighborhood. "I'd seen enough of your work on those easement filings to know that." Clara took a breath. "All right," she said. "Then here's what happens next." Tsog. The Land Commission filing went in on a Thursday. Clara delivered it herself in person to the state office in Austin. She wore her good dress, not because she wanted to dress for them, but because she understood that women who showed up in good dresses got seen differently than women who showed up in barn clothes, and she had a document that needed to be received, not dismissed. The clerk read the cover sheet. Then he read it again. "This name's Caldwell Holdings," he said. "Yes," Clara said, "and 3 current county commissioners." "2 former commissioners and 1 current judge," Clara said. "I've listed the distinctions on page 4. The clerk looked at her over his reading spectacles. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "do you understand what this will—" "I understand what it will do," Clara said. "That's why I'm here." She left him holding the filing and took the next train back to Caldwell County. By the time she got home, the news had moved faster than she had. It always did. Gerald Beaumont came to her door that evening. Not to the ranch house. Not in the morning when the work was happening. He came at dusk, which was the hour men came when they wanted to make things feel private and therefore manageable. Clara saw him riding up from the kitchen window and felt nothing in particular, not dread, not anger, just the specific clarity that comes from knowing exactly what conversation is about to happen. She opened the door before he knocked. "Pa," she said. "You filed with the State Land Commission," he said. "I did. You understand what that does to our position with the Caldwells." He wasn't screaming. He was past screaming. His voice had the particular flatness of a man who has finally run out of registers. Whatever chance Charlotte had, whatever standing this family— "Pa," she said, "come inside." He came in. He sat at the kitchen table. He looked for the first time she could remember like an old man. Not a diminished one, not pitiful, just old, tired. The way people look when they've spent a long time pushing against something, and the something has finally stopped pushing back. "I kept that letter," he said. "From Catherine Caldwell. I always thought—" He stopped. "You thought it might be useful," Clara said. "I thought it might be leverage." He said it like he was confessing it to someone other than her. "Someday, if the Caldwells ever came after the Beaumont water rights." He looked at the table. "I never thought you'd be the one to find it." "You gave me the accounts," Clara said. "All of them. You handed me the box yourself." "I forgot it was in there," he said quietly. The kitchen was very still. "Pa." Clara sat down across from him. "I need to say something to you, and I need you to hear it fully. Not as an attack, as a truth." He looked at her. "You have a daughter," she said, "who has spent 10 years keeping everything you built from falling apart, who has worked without credit, without recognition, without once being asked if she wanted a different life, who has loved this land and this family with everything she had, and never once been told that it was seen or valued." She kept her voice level. "And you have another daughter who has been raised beautifully and dressed carefully and prepared for a future that was never her own choosing either, and neither one of us was ever really asked what we wanted." She paused. "That's on you, Pa. And I'm telling you plainly because you deserve the plain version of it. Gerald Beaumont looked at his hands. "I know," he said. His voice was very small. "I know you know," she said. "I'm not asking you to apologize tonight. I'm asking you to stop making it worse. Stop going to Aldridge. Stop spreading stories about the accounts. Stop trying to manage what I do as if I'm still 12 years old." She held his gaze. "Let me do what I do, and let Charlotte decide her own future." He was quiet for a long time. "She told me something last week," he said finally. "Charlotte." "What did she tell you?" "She told me she never wanted to marry Ethan Caldwell," he said. "She told me she'd been trying to find a way to say it for 2 years." He looked up. "She said she wants to go to school. In Dallas. There's a women's academy. She wants to study literature." Clara stared at him. "She never told me that," she said. "She said she couldn't," Gerald said. "She said she was afraid of what it would cost, what I'd say." He pressed his mouth together. "I told her no. Last week I told her no. I said the family needed—" He stopped. "It was automatic. I just said no before I'd finished hearing her." Clara looked at her father for a long moment. "Pa," she said, "call her. Tonight. Tell her yes." He looked at her. "Tell her yes," Clara said again. "You can afford to lose one plan for her. You cannot afford to lose her." His jaw worked. "And what about you?" he said. "What do you want, Clara? What have you ever wanted that I never thought to ask?" It was the first time in her memory he had asked. She felt the door in her chest move again, the same door Ethan's words had pushed. And this time, she didn't close it. "I want the land to mean something honest," she said. "I want the work I do to have my name on it, and I want a life that isn't built on other people's choices." She paused. "I'm working on all three." The fallout from the Land Commission filing moved through Caldwell County like a hard winter slow at the edges, then all at once. The county commissioners' names became a matter of public record. Judge Aldridge, facing exposure of his role in the Henderson transfer, resigned from the bench before the inquiry reached its formal stage. His resignation was quiet, but the reason behind it was not. Not in a county where everyone's business was everyone else's business by the second morning. The Caldwell Ranch lost the Henderson water allocation. That much was certain and swift. 40 yards of boundary line restored to where the 1871 survey had always placed it translated into a significant loss of grazing capacity on the East Range. 3 investors who had been quietly backing Caldwell expansion into the Northern Territories pulled their commitments within 2 weeks of the filing becoming public. Harlan Caldwell released a statement through his lawyer. It was carefully worded. It acknowledged errors in historical land filings. It pledged cooperation with the Commission's review. It offered a financial settlement to the Henderson family, not because a court required it, but because it was, as the statement said, the right thing to do. The statement had been drafted in significant part by Clara Beaumont. Ethan had brought her the draft. She had rewritten 3/4 of it. He had taken it back to his father, who had read her version in silence, and then signed it without changing a word. He said, "You write like someone who knows exactly where the line is," Ethan told her. "The line between what she said. Between accountability and destruction," he said. "He said you could have made that statement bury us. You didn't." "Burying the Caldwell name wasn't the point," Clara said. "Getting the Henderson family their settlement was the point." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "You are the most precise person I have ever met," he said. "I'm a practical person," she said. "They're not the same thing," he said. "Practical people do what works. You do what's right, and then find the most practical way to get there. That's different." He paused. "That's considerably rarer." Clara did not have an answer for that. She turned back to the document she was working on, because turning back to the work was the thing she knew how to do when she didn't know what else to do. But she was smiling, just slightly, when she thought he couldn't see it. He could see it. The Vega family had been gone for 16 years. Their land had long since been folded into a neighboring operation. There was no simple mechanism to restore what had been taken, not the land, not the years, not the man who had worked it and died before he saw it returned. But the Henderson widow, a woman named Ruth Henderson, who was 61 years old and living in a boarding house in Abilene, received a letter on a Tuesday afternoon in October. She read it standing up in the hallway, still in her coat from the market. It told her that the State Land Commission had reviewed her family's case, that the original 1871 boundary had been restored to the official record, that a financial settlement had been reached on her behalf, that the land itself was under separate negotiation, and while she should not expect a full restoration, she should expect something, not nothing, not silence, not the closed door that had been her family's experience for 11 years. The letter was signed by the Land Commission, but attached to it was a personal note handwritten that was not from any official. It said, "Your family was wronged. What was done cannot be fully undone. But the record now tells the truth. I am sorry it took this long for someone to find it." It was signed Clara Beaumont, Caldwell County. Ruth Henderson sat down on the hall bench and held both letters and wept not from sorrow, but from the particular overwhelming relief of a person who has been told after a very long silence that they were not wrong to remember it differently. Charlotte left for Dallas in November. She came to the east fence line on the morning she departed while Clara was working the way she always did when she had something to say that was too important for the house. "I'm going," she said. "I know," Clara said. "Train at noon." "Clara." Charlotte looked at her. "I'm sorry. For all of it. For not seeing it. For being the one he chose to see, and not asking what that cost you." "Charlie," Clara said. She set down the fence tool. "You were a child. We both were. We survived him the way we could." "I'm not a child anymore," Charlotte said. "No?" Clara said. "You're not." Charlotte moved forward and hugged her sister properly fully, not the careful, polite embrace of two women managing each other, but the grip of someone who means it. Clara hugged her back. "Study hard," Clara said into her sister's shoulder, "and write to me." "Every week," Charlotte said. She pulled back. Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling, and it was Clara realized the first genuine smile she'd seen on her sister's face in longer than she could name. Charlotte mounted her horse. She looked back once. "He chose right, you know," she said. "Ethan. He chose right." And she rode toward the station. Clara stood at the fence and watched her go. The morning was cold and clear, and the sky was that specific Texas blue that had no name for how big it was. She felt something settle in her chest, not the closing of a door, but the opening of one. Something she hadn't let herself feel in a very long time. She heard a horse coming up the east road, the familiar gait, the unhurried pace. She didn't turn around. "She's gone," Ethan said behind her. "Just now," Clara said. He dismounted. He came to stand beside her at the fence, not too close, not performing anything, just standing there the way he always stood comfortable in whatever space the moment offered. "My father asked me something last night," he said. "What did he ask?" "He asked if I was sure." Ethan paused. "About you." Clara looked at him. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I was sure the first time I asked," he said. "I'm considerably more sure now." The wind moved across the flat land. Somewhere on the east range, a cow called to her calf. "Ethan," Clara said. "Yeah." "Ask me again," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to face her. And his voice, when it came, was the same as it had been that night in the Caldwell mansion, unhurried, real, unperforming anything. "Clara Beaumont," he said, "will you marry me?" She looked at him. She thought of everything she'd read in those documents, everything she'd built and carried and proved, everything she'd said to her father, to his father, to herself, in the dark of the barn at 3 a.m, with a lamp burning low and her hands not entirely steady. She thought of Catherine Caldwell, who had tried and been silenced. She thought of Ruth Henderson reading a letter in a boarding house hallway. She thought of Charlotte riding toward a train and a future that was finally her own. "Yes," Clara said. "Just that. Clean and plain and without decoration." The way she said everything that mattered. The wedding was not what anyone expected. There was no mansion, no silverware imported from back east, no guest list curated by men with something to prove. There was the Beaumont Ranch Yard on a clear December morning, a minister who'd known Clara since she was 9 years old, and about 40 people who had earned the right to be there by being real. Delacroix stood in the front row and looked at his boots the whole ceremony because he was not a man comfortable with emotion, and he knew he was full of it. Ethan wore the dark vest. Clara wore her mother's dress let out slightly at the shoulders because she was broader than her mother had been broader from years of actual work, and she had not altered that fact to fit the dress, but altered the dress to fit that fact. When the minister asked if anyone present had objection, Gerald Beaumont, seated in the second row, said nothing. He had driven himself to the ceremony. He had arrived early. He had not said anything to Clara before the service began, but he had pressed her hand once briefly when she passed him, and she had felt in that grip the full weight of everything he didn't know how to say. She had squeezed back. It was enough. For now, it was enough. When Ethan took her hand at the altar and the minister asked the words, Clara looked at him, this man who had walked past every performance in a room full of performances and stopped in front of the one real thing, and she said, I do, in the same voice she used for everything that mattered. Plain, clean, without decoration. Ethan said it back the same way. And that was that. Harlan Caldwell did not attend the wedding. He had offered to. Ethan had told him it was Clara's decision. Clara had thought about it for 2 days, and then said simply that she wasn't ready, and that she hoped he understood. He had said he did. What he did instead surprised everyone, including Ethan. On the morning of the wedding, Harlan Caldwell rode to the East Range alone. No foreman, no lawyer, no witness, except the flat Texas sky, and he found the old Henderson boundary marker that the survey correction had restored to the official record. He dismounted. He stood there for a while. And then he did something no one ever saw and no one could fully confirm, though Delacroix's youngest hand swore years later he'd been checking the north fence that morning and seen it from a distance. Harlan Caldwell took his hat off. And he stood at that boundary marker for a long time with his hat in his hands. That was all. He put his hat back on and rode home. But Ethan heard about it. And when he told Clara, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Good. Just that. The first year was hard in the way that honest things are hard, not crushing, not hopeless, but requiring. The Caldwell Ranch had lost the East Water allocation, and with it the carrying capacity for a significant portion of the herd. 3 of the northern expansion contracts had collapsed when the investors pulled out. Harlan's lawyer was still managing the formal commission review, which moved with the particular slowness of institutional processes and cost money every week it continued. Ethan and Clara ran the operation together from the first morning after the wedding. Not in theory, not in the polite arrangement where one person makes decisions and the other is consulted for form's sake. They ran it the way 2 people run something when they are both genuinely indispensable, each one covering what the other didn't see, each one checking the other's blind spots without being asked. Ethan understood cattle the way Clara understood paper. He could read a herd the way she read a contract, knowing by instinct and accumulated knowledge what was healthy and what was a warning, and what needed immediate action. Clara understood the legal and financial architecture of the operation at a level that no one, including Reeves, had fully mapped until she'd been inside it for 3 months. You found 2 redundant filing fees we've been paying since 1887. Reeves said to her one morning with an expression that was caught between professional admiration and personal mortification. It happens, Clara said. Accounts accumulate. Nobody goes back and cleans them. I should have, he said. Yes, she said. But you do now, so. Reeves looked at her for a moment. Then he said, Mrs. Caldwell, for what it's worth, this operation is better run today than it has been in 20 years. And that is not primarily my doing. Clara looked at him. Write that down somewhere, she said. "I may need it later." He almost smiled. It was the closest she'd seen him come. Todd. The challenge she hadn't anticipated came in February from a direction she should have expected. One of the former commissioners, a man named Dodd, who had signed the Henderson transfer filing, had hired his own lawyer and was contesting the commission's findings. He claimed the 1871 survey Clara had produced was itself a forgery. He claimed she had manufactured the document to destroy the Caldwell name and profit from the resulting settlement. He filed his counterclaim on a Monday. By Wednesday, it was in 3 county newspapers. Clara found out from Delacroix, who brought her the papers at the east fence without comment. She read all 3 articles standing up. Then she handed them back to Delacroix and said, "Get the wagon. I need to go to Austin." Ethan was at the South Range. She left him a note. She did not wait for him to come back, because she did not need him to come back for this. She needed to handle it herself cleanly before Dodd's version of events had time to take root. She arrived at the state land office the following morning with a case file that was by any measure one of the most meticulously prepared documents ever submitted by a private citizen to the Texas Land Commission. It contained the original 1871 survey, with the state land office's own date stamp and reference number, the request form she had filed 14 months ago, the confirmation receipt, and a sworn statement from the clerk who had pulled the document from the archive. It contained a chain of custody record she had built backward from the day she'd received it. It contained 3 independent expert assessments of the document's age and authenticity commissioned from map historians at 2 different universities. And it contained at the back a simple comparative analysis. 20 pages, very clear, very precise, showing every point at which the Caldwell filings' claimed survey diverged from every other land record in Caldwell County that referenced the same geographic markers. The commissioner who received it read the cover summary. Then he looked up at her. "Did you prepare this yourself?" he said. "Yes," Clara said. "You're not a lawyer." "No," she said. "I'm better at reading documents than most lawyers I've met, and I've had 8 years of practice." Dodd's counterclaim was formally dismissed 11 days later. The newspapers that had run the original story ran 2 lines about the dismissal on the back page. Clara cut out both 2-line items and put them in the box in the barn, beside Catherine Caldwell's letter, beside the original Henderson survey, beside everything else that had made the truth visible. Ruth Henderson came to Caldwell County in March. Clara had not planned it. She had sent the letter, and she had not expected a response, let alone a visit. And when Delacroix told her a woman had arrived at the gate, asking for Mrs. Caldwell, Clara had needed a moment to understand that Mrs. Caldwell was herself. She was still getting used to that. Ruth Henderson was 61 years old, and she walked like a woman who had carried a long weight for a long time and had recently put some of it down. She had her husband's eyes, someone had told Clara, dark and steady, and not given to looking away. They sat in the Caldwell kitchen, and Clara poured coffee, and Ruth said, "I read your note, the one attached to the commission letter." "Yes," Clara said. "I want to know," Ruth said, "how you found it. How you decided to why you kept pulling at it when you didn't have to." Clara thought about how to answer that. "I was collecting land records," she said, "for my own family, for protection. And I found a document that didn't match what everything else said. And once I found it..." She paused. "I've spent my whole life watching things get buried because it was convenient to bury them. Because the people who would have benefited from the truth had less power than the people who benefited from the lie." She looked at Ruth. "I couldn't unknow what I'd found, and I couldn't leave it buried." Ruth Henderson was quiet for a moment. "My husband worked that land for 22 years, she said. "He built every fence post by hand. He knew every water source, every seasonal shift, every weak spot in the soil. And then one morning, a sheriff's deputy showed up with a court order and told him it wasn't his anymore." She set her coffee cup down. "He never recovered from it. Not the losing of it. The injustice of it. That's what killed him, not grief. Injustice has a different weight. Clara felt something in her chest pull tight. "I know," she said quietly. "What you did," Ruth said, "won't bring him back, won't give us those years. I know that." She looked at Clara directly. "But my children will know the record says the truth now. My grandchildren will know it." Her voice was steady. "That matters. More than I can tell you that matters." Clara did not trust herself to speak for a moment. She nodded. Once. The way she nodded at everything that was true and complete and didn't need addition. Harlan Caldwell had a stroke in April. It was not fatal. It left him slower on his left side and with a slight drag to his speech that had not been there before. He accepted both facts with the particular grace of a man who has recently recalibrated what he considers loss. He called Clara to his study 3 weeks after it happened. She came alone. She sat across from him. He looked older than she'd ever seen him, which was accurate because something had gone out of him and something else had come in, and the something else was quieter and less armored. "I want to give you something," he said. "You don't need. Let me finish." His speech was slightly slower now, but the precision was intact. "I want to give you the Eastern Account Management, formally, with your name on the authority documents." He paused. "Not because Ethan asked me to. He didn't. Because it's yours already in every way that matters, and I'm tired of the paperwork saying different." Clara looked at him. "Why?" she said. Not challenging, actually asking. "Because Catherine would have wanted it," he said. She would have liked you. She would have been grateful." He pressed his mouth together. "And because I spent 30 years building something on a crooked foundation and calling it solid. You're the one who made it honest. The least I can do is put your name on the part that's clean." Clara was quiet for a moment. "All right," she said. "On one condition." He raised an eyebrow. "The Vega family," she said. "I've been tracking them. 2 of the grandchildren are still in Texas. I want to set up a land access agreement for the Southern Creek property. Not a gift and access easement, fairly compensated, properly documented." She held his gaze. "The Hendersons had a settlement. The Vegas had nothing. I want to fix that." Harlan looked at her for a long moment. "Draft it," he said. "I'll sign it." She stood to leave. "Clara," he said. She stopped. "My son made the right choice," he said. "I want you to know I understand that now." A pause. "I didn't that night. I thought he was being foolish, throwing away what I'd built for sentiment." He looked at the window. "I know now what he saw that I didn't." "What did he see?" she said. "That the measure of a person isn't what they're born to," Harlan said. "It's what they refuse to become." Clara looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Write that down somewhere, Mr. Caldwell. Your grandchildren are going to want to hear it." And she walked out. Their daughter was born in November, when the Texas sky had gone that deep cold blue that meant winter was serious this year. They named her Catherine, and if Harlan Caldwell, when he first held her, turned his face away from the room for a moment before he composed himself. Neither Ethan nor Clara said anything about it. Some things didn't need to be said. Catherine grew up on a ranch that was smaller than the one Ethan had been born into and worth more than anything Harlan had built in every way that mattered. She grew up knowing water law before she could properly read it. She grew up watching her mother and father run something together, not one managing the other, not one invisible, while the other got the credit, but 2 people genuinely, equally, irreplaceably necessary to the thing they'd built. She grew up knowing without being told directly that the land she stood on had been made honest at a cost. That honesty had cost something, and that cost was what made it worth keeping. She was 7 years old when she asked. It was an evening in October. They were standing on the long hill that overlooked the East Range, the 3 of them, the way they often ended the day when the work was done and the light was that particular Texas gold. Catherine was holding her father's hand. She looked up at him, The way children look at parents when they've been carrying a question for a while and have finally decided the moment is right. "Papa," she said, "why did you choose Mama?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. Clara did not look at him. She looked out at the land, the smaller, cleaner, honest Caldwell Ranch running true under the October sky. She felt his hand find hers. Because, Ethan said, she was the only person in the room who never pretended to be someone she wasn't. Catherine thought about this. "That's it," she said. "That's everything," he said. Catherine considered this with the gravity of a 7-year-old processing a large idea. Then she nodded once, apparently satisfied, and went back to watching the cattle on the East Range. Clara held Ethan's hand in the cooling air and looked out at the land they had made honest together, and she thought about a girl who had grown up invisible, who had carried a family on her back and signed her father's name to the work she'd done, who had stood at the edge of a room full of people who looked through her and told herself that she didn't need to be seen. She had been wrong about that. Not about the work had been worth doing whether anyone saw it or not, but about not needing to be seen. Everyone needed to be seen. The difference was learning to live in your full truth until the right eyes found you. She had learned it late. She had learned it hard. She had learned it from land records and forged surveys, and a dead woman's letter, and a room full of candlelight, and one man who had looked directly at her when everyone else was performing for each other. She had learned it on her own terms, and that she understood now, standing on this hill with her husband's hand in hers and her daughter beside her, and the honest land spread out below them in the fading Texas light. That was not a small thing. That was everything. Clara Beaumont Caldwell, the woman nobody had thought to see, had become impossible to erase. And she had done it the only way that lasts, not through power, not through revenge, not through becoming what the world had expected her to fight. She had done it by refusing every single day to be anything less than exactly who she was. That was her legacy. That was what she left on the land, and no survey forged or otherwise would ever move that line.